Well, I'm glad you're here. If you're just joining us, Dean Baker is the co-founder of the Center for Economic Policy Research, founded that in 1999. His areas of research include housing and macroeconomics, intellectual property, social security, Medicare, European labor markets. There's a lot that he can give us the education that we need on. He's also the author of the book Rigged: How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. Hey, I think you were right on that one, Dean. His blog, Beat the Press, provides commentary on economic reporting. It's one of my favorite go-to places to get to get the real scoop, the real story. And one of your latest pieces here, we're talking about this post-pandemic economy. I don't even think we're post-pandemic. You certainly aren't where you are in the country. But you talk about how it's important to think about what we are measuring, that the raw numbers don't take into account the important ways we evaluate well-being. Can you talk about what we can look at, what we're doing now to measure our country's well-being, and what we need to change in order to get a more accurate reading?
Yeah, well, just to be clear, when I'm saying post-pandemic, I'm thinking, where the threat has largely gone away. Presumably with the vaccine, I suppose if we got effective treatment, so we didn't have to worry that, we could die or have long-term, problems. But I'm not talking about now, in other words. So just to be clear to people. And the issue that I'm raising here is that one of the things that's likely to be lasting as a result of this shutdown period is simply much more telecommuting. So, I've been working from home for a while, but I mean, there's a lot of people, they're now telecommuting. And the reality is that's probably going to stick, not with every case, but certainly much, much more than had been pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. And the point I was making is that that's going to appear in some ways as lower GDP. So you have a lot of people that used to commute to downtown Manhattan every day and they had to drive a car.
We literally this past weekend just moved to Connecticut because both of my husband look like we're going to be telecommuting for at least a year. So we have no reason to be paying an exorbitant rent for a tiny place to live.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to make that call. So we're going to have a lot more telecommuting, a lot less actual commuting. And there's all these expenses associated with commuting. So you need a car, or you take Uber, or you take the metro or the transit, whatever it might be. And then when you're downtown, you have lunch somewhere. You're not doing that. You probably have to, you have to use dry cleaner services. People, when they go downtown, they go to gyms, at lunch or after work, before work, whatever it might be. All of these things aren't going to be happening, or at least be happening much, much less.
Do you see the decay of our cities on the horizon because of this lack of commuting that is probably not going to come back?
It will be a big issue. I mean, certainly, New York City is going to have a very, very big issue where these high-rise office buildings, they're going to be half empty. They're not going to need.
Trump's going to fill them with political prisoners, Dean.
That's probably in his plans. So let's hope he doesn't get a chance to act on that. But yeah, in terms of the businesses that have been there, you're going to find a lot of businesses are going to say, we don't need this expensive office space. So they're going to cut back hugely. Those businesses, that's going to be a really big issue. So we're going to see a real hollowing out, I think, of many major cities. The point I'm making is that will be counted as a loss of GDP. And obviously it's a loss to those workers. So let me just give me a moment here to clarify this. It's if we have expenses that are associated with going to work, that really shouldn't be counted as GDP. And the best analogy I can make to this is healthcare. So let's imagine we spend about 18%, a bit less than 18% GDP on healthcare. So suppose, through some magic, we all exercise more, or, whatever it might be, our health radically improves so that we could have the same health. And instead of spending 18% of GDP on healthcare, we'd spend 9% of GDP on healthcare. Now, that would look like a big fall in GDP because we're getting less healthcare services. We're taking fewer drugs. We're getting less surgeries, less days in the hospital, all these things associated with healthcare that people are employed doing. Well, my argument is that we shouldn't really see that as a loss. Obviously, it's a loss in the services, but we don't care. We don't value the surgery. We don't value the drugs. We value our health. Mm-hmm. And in the case of people going to work, well, what we value is we have to be able to do our jobs. If we could do our jobs without commuting, that's great. Now, again, coming back to all the people who lose their jobs, the people that were driving Ubers, the people that were working at those lunch spots. Well, the point is, we've in effect had a massive increase in productivity. We could produce the same amount of output with many fewer workers. We should see it as that. And what that means is we have an enormous opportunity to address unmet needs.
Mm.
So everyone's head, or at least it should be in everyone's head, let's do something about climate change. Let's have mass installations of solar panels and conservation, so we use less energy in our houses. More mass transit, for the transit we still have. People should be taking mass transit rather than driving a car. All these things that we could think of that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Childcare, massive needs for childcare. I mean,
massive need right in
yeah.
this house for childcare.
Well, it's been brought
Anyone
home
help us?
The pandemic, because they don't, the places they used to take their kids aren't there. So that's, something.
And also with the change of commuting, people will, a lot of people like do their commute, at least in New York, drop their kid off on the way. So people need different childcare options that are, what, Dean, I'm in Connecticut, in a rural area of Connecticut, and we passed this historic little red schoolhouse. That some people saved it, whose families actually passed through that schoolhouse. And I'm thinking, hey, can we open this up? 6 kids fit in there and 1 teacher. And to me, that sounds like the perfect anti-pandemic educational environment, more tangible, more, everything that progressives have been calling for in terms of more attention to schools, more money to schools, more attention to students. It seems like some of the outcomes here could be more humane.
Absolutely. And that's the important point here, that we have to understand that we're, in effect, I'm hesitant to use the term freeing up resources. That means unemployed workers. But the point is, we could commit resources. The government could spend money, in other words, the federal government. Obviously, states can't do that. Connecticut, New York, they can't spend as much as they want. The federal government, in effect, can. And the limit at the end of the day is how much resources we have in the economy. So a result of this shift from regular commuting to telecommuting, people working from home, is that we're going to have a lot of resources, which means we shouldn't be afraid to use it. That means the government should be prepared to spend the money. So we already have the people running around now, oh my God, the deficit, the deficit, the deficit. So the point that I would make here is, well, the deficit is more than just fine. We want the deficit. We need the deficit because we have all these people who otherwise wouldn't be working. So, and again, it's not just make work. We have things they have to do. We have to have childcare. We have to do something on global warming. A lot of people aren't getting health care that they should. So
We
there's a
need hand
long
sanitizer.
list. Hand sanitizer, exactly. So there's a long list of things that we need as a society that we've been neglecting. And if we have fewer resources devoted to people commuting to work, that's really a positive, because that means we could use those resources elsewhere where they're badly needed.
Dean, you're just talking about having to change the way we measure success and productivity frightens me, because in terms of electoral politics, President Trump wants to run on how the economy is great. And if he gets a hold of the message that we're putting out here was, well, the old measures aren't so great, let's have some new measures. I just feel like he could spin it in a way that makes corporate fascism seem like a great idea. Your thoughts?
Well, look, Trump lies about everything. So, his statements bear almost no relationship to the truth, and we should just take that for granted.
But what would be the most progressive way to measure a successful economy?
Well, I don't think, people looking for a single metric, I don't think we're going to find one. So, people, to be clear, I'm not complaining about GDP. I think it's very good for what it is. It's not a comprehensive measure of well-being. I often make the comparison to weight. You go to your doctor's office and doctor weighs you and you have the right weight. Well, okay, that's good, but you might still be dying of cancer.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean you're healthy. On the other hand, if you're 50% above your normal body weight, that's probably a problem. If you're 50% below, again, probably a problem. But, I want to know the weight, and same, I want to know GDP. Is that a comprehensive measure of well-being? No. So if we have a really high GDP because we're spending a lot on healthcare and getting nothing for it, which is kind of the story, then that doesn't mean we have a good economy. It doesn't mean we're doing well as a society.
Do
So
you see?
GDP is a useful measure, but it's not in any way a comprehensive measure of well-being. And I think people who've tried to take it as that are really misleading themselves, misleading others.
Do you see the mainstream media using the GDP as a way to um, convince us all that everything's fine in terms of the economy?
Well, I think there is a tendency to do that. And one of the interesting things, if you do sort of a simple comparison, let's look at GDP per person in the United States, compare that to GDP per person in Germany or France, or pick your country in West Europe, wealthy country in West Europe. We're 20-25% higher. So a lot of people go, oh, we have a much higher standard of living than those countries. Well, the next thing that at least I would look at is, well, how much do they work there? And what you find is that on average, they work about 20-25% less. Just about everyone in Germany and France, they have 5 or 6 weeks a year of vacation. They tend to retire 61, 62. People here often work till 65 or older. I mean, it's not bad to work if you want to, but if you have to, that's a different story. So that's when people make a simple GDP comparison like that, it's not really very informative. Now, also, obviously, you want to look at distribution. So in the US, if you pulled out the top 10% and said, okay, what do the bottom 90% have in the US versus Germany and France? Well, they have much more in Germany and France. So, GDP is a useful, important measure. Comprehensive measure of well-being doesn't come close.
We're live on Twitch and live on Facebook. If you are watching on Twitch, my people in the stream chat, please put if you have a question or a thought you'd like Dean to comment on, now's the time to put it in the stream chat. Same goes with those of us watching on Facebook. So you said the second thing that we should look at is how long people work. Can we go down the list of other things we could look at to really get a sense of what a successful economy would be?
Well, as I said, distribution is obviously hugely important. So if you have a high GDP because the 1% is doing great, they have all these different homes and cars, well, good for the 1%.
They're
That's not
doing
good for the rest of
terrific.
us.
Yeah.
You want to know things like, people's health outcomes, so, I mean, just at a simple level, if you look at things like life expectancy, infant mortality, the U.S. does very poorly. Compared to, say, West Europe. In fact, compared to a lot of countries that aren't even particularly rich, we do poorly. But if you look at other measures, you go, okay, well, suppose you get sick, suppose you get cancer in the U.S. How do you do compared to West Europe? Well, you do about the same, and this is one of the things that's striking. We spend this huge amount of money on our healthcare system, and ignoring all the socioeconomic factors that affect health. You go in, you have liver cancer, you have breast cancer. Your odds aren't particularly better in the U.S. than they are in these other countries that spend much, much less.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to know, how well are people living? Education standards, of course, are important. What percent of the people graduate high school? What percent have post-secondary education? So these are the sorts of things that I would want to look at. So again, I mean, people have put these into a single measure. And my view is, of course, you could do that, but there's basically an infinite number of ways you could do that. So everyone goes, oh, well, I've got the best way. And I'm going, right. Well, your way is fine, but there's other ways that are fine too. And we're not going to get the best way. So,
so how, even if we had a way that was a more, indicative measure of the state of the economy here in the US, how would we convince, say, corporate media outlets to use it? Because what they're using now seems to point, they want to keep people, it seems to me that they're trying to keep people afraid. And they're also suggesting that the stock market's just fine when it is. And, that even when there's a big drop, they want terror, but then there's a big rally. And they, it certainly seems like they're doing an economic playbook that would continue the current economic system that we're in.
Yeah, well, this is why I'm so reluctant to spend any effort saying we need them to use a new measure, because they do such a bad job with the existing measures. So, one of the things that I've harped on endlessly, and literally no one disagrees with me on this, is that when they use numbers, when they say, oh, we're going to have a budget deficit next year of 460 billion. Okay, what does that mean? No one knows what that means.
No one knows what that means.
Yeah, you have your budget wonks. I know what it means. That's my job. I look at this stuff, but most people have other jobs. So they hear 460 billion. They have no clue. They hear we're spending 70 billion on food stamps. Go, oh my God, that's a lot of money. 70 billion. I'll never have 70 billion dollars. Well, Bill Gates will, but not many of us will. So they think that's a lot of money. We'll go, no, it's actually not that much money. It's about 1.6% of the budget. It's it's not trivial, but if we eliminate it, you're not going to get a big tax rebate or anything. But people don't know that. So they use these really big numbers. And again, I've been back and forth with reporters. None of them have ever tried to tell me that a substantial segment of their audience understands these numbers. So I go, why can't you put that in some context? It takes 2 seconds. Say, oh, it's 1.6% of the budget, or the 460 billion budget deficit. That's 2% of GDP. You've given some information. You could do it on a per person basis. There's not a single way to do it. There's not a perfect best way. But the point is, put it in some context so that it's meaningful to your audience. And they don't do it. And
No,
so
they
again,
don't do
here
it.
it is. They all acknowledge it's bad reporting, but they won't change.
Fascinating. Well, I'm not surprised. We have some questions and thoughts coming in for you from the Twitch chat from Free Xenon. A question about have you heard of the economies of the common good?
I've heard a little bit, yes. I can't claim any great expertise. I mean, my view is things like this are helpful, so people acting cooperatively and, helping each other out. That's good. I mean, I don't think that's going to lead to systematic change, but I'm not going to tell anyone not to do it, So I think insofar as you could organize groups within a community and they, act collectively, they trade, as I understand it, they basically trade services. So, I'll mow your lawn, you'll cook a dinner. I'm sorry to be sexist there. I'll cook the dinner, you mow the lawn.
Oh, I love
Whatever,
mowing.
but
I didn't see that at all.
but
Yes.
but anyhow, the idea is that trading services. I think that's great. People do that. I mean, I don't think that holds out much hope for systematic change in the country. But insofar as people could organize themselves and do that, it's a good thing.
I mean, isn't money supposed to be just a system of exchanging goods for services? So it's like if we get rid of the money, you're just doing the thing that the money's supposed to do in the first place.
Yeah, but you might have some personal relationships with people. So I mean, again, I don't think it's a bad thing. It just, as I say, I don't see it as a route to systematic
You're
change.
right. The money mediates the relationship and therefore deadens it a little bit. Fascinating. Dean, I think that economists are in great demand right now because people don't really know what to make of what is happening in the economy. And right now, we've just seen last week the failure of Republicans and Democrats in the Senate to extend unemployment benefits, to do something about put a moratorium on people being thrown out of their homes. People are in arrears on their rent because they didn't do a strike rent or a moratorium on rents. They didn't ask the banks to do any heavy lifting over this pandemic at all. They're just asking the people to do it. What are your thoughts about, what's on the horizon for us? It
Well,
seems
it's
like
a
it's
really
bad
tough
news.
question. I mean, part of it, to my view, is just asking, what are we trying to do? So, a lot of people are talking about stimulus packages, and I go, no, we don't want stimulus. So, the same thing happened in April. What we want is for people to be able to stay home. So, you have a lot of the Republicans running around going, oh my God, we're giving people $600 a week in unemployment benefits. That's going to discourage them from working. Well, it will to some extent, and that's fine because we have 3 times, if you pull out New York and New Jersey, you look at the rest of the country, we have 3 times the rate of infections today as we did back in April when we were all shutting down. So, yeah, we should be discouraging people from working. There's a lot of people that have health issues. They shouldn't be exposed to the virus, or someone in their family has a health issue. So if they get sick, they're likely to pass it on to a family member. So we should be thinking now, as we should have been in April, how do we get people through this period till we have the virus under control? So that does mean, things like the $600 a week checks for unemployed workers, rent moratorium, mortgage, foreclosure moratorium, eviction moratorium, what I meant to say. So these are things that we have to be doing to try to get people through this period, which unfortunately, let's be straight about it. We've totally failed. If you compare the United States to France, Germany, Italy, pick your country, they've all massively reduced their incidence of infection over the last 3 or 4 months. Ours have gone up.
It
I mean, I
certainly
don't know
doesn't
how.
seem like reducing infection is how the current administration is measuring success.
I have no idea how. I mean, I think they define what they're doing as success, no matter what the outcome is. That's the
Yeah.
only, because they're out there boasting about it, and you're going, what do you have to boast about? I mean, we have over 1,000 people a day dying, 60,000. We've had over 70,000 some days getting infected, and they're acting like things are great. No, I mean, you can't run a normal economy, a normal country in that context.
Quasi Spec on our Twitch asks something related to what we were just talking about. Do you have an opinion, Dean, on which stimulus has the best political chances of being enacted? The unemployment bonuses, the direct payments?
Well, I think at the end of the day, they will get the unemployment supplements. May not be 600. I mean, maybe it'll be some. I wouldn't consider that the worst thing, by the way. I mean, I don't want to see them reduced, but if they end up being 400, that would still be enough to certainly keep the vast majority of unemployed workers whole. So I'm not advocating that, but if you end up with that, so I think they will be able to get that. I think be able to get the eviction moratorium. They almost certainly will get the pandemic checks. I wasn't a fan of that. 1,200 per person. A lot of people, I'm still getting a lot of people, they're still working, or you have retirees that, they weren't hit by it. So people are saying, well, why shouldn't they get help too? And go, well, what was the hit for them?
What do
If
they
they're still
need for
getting.
help? Right.
So anyhow, I think that's likely to get through. I mean, one of the things I hope at least that the Democrats will do this time, last time I had direct deposit, but people got the checks. They had Donald Trump's signature on them. And
Oh,
then
I saw that.
they got a separate letter from Donald Trump. So he's like taking
Saying
credit for
you're
this.
welcome. Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I hope they write in the law that his name is not going to appear on the check. And if Donald Trump wants to send a letter taking credit, well, that should come from his campaign.
Put the Democrats' names on there. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
I
The
mean,
Democrats.
it's just absurd. So I mean, no, I do blame Donald Trump. It broke the law, but naturally, he's going to try to do anything he can for political advantage, and the Democrats should be smart enough to say, no, this isn't about you getting a few points for your election.
I'm going to ask you one last question from the Twitch, and I thank you for your time here today, Dean. I appreciate it. We're speaking with Dean Baker, economist. You can follow him on Twitter at DeanBaker13. Mukor asks, does Dean see the governments all around aggressive, do counter-cyclic spending, or will the Austerian mindset prevail on their minds?
That's a really good question. The U.S., I'm hoping will be able to maintain this into a Biden administration. I mean, we're joking about, the Republicans yelling about deficits means they think Biden's going to win, because they obviously didn't care about deficits when Trump was sitting there. But if you look at Europe, they're absolutely obsessed with balanced budgets. And one of the big departures from past practices was that the European Union passed, I'm forgetting what they called it exactly, but basically this big spending measure that's European Union wide. So what that means is you get money going from Germany, from Netherlands, kind of the northern countries that have been doing very well economically, to help out Spain and Italy and Greece, the countries that are doing much less well. So that was a really, really big step. But whether that's going to be carried over so that they could say, look, we have to do a lot of spending to get the economy here back on track, I think it's going to be a battle, but that was a really big step.
Dean Baker, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we're speaking with Dean Baker, co-founder of the Center for Economic Policy and Research and the author of Rigged: How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. Find his blog, Beat the Press, and get more Dean. Thanks again for joining us, Dean. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Stay
Enjoy
well
Connecticut.
until the next time.